Hi, Namalee. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation for a conversation about mixed heritage. I would love to start where I start with pretty much all the guests that I've had on this podcast. And that is the question, can you tell me what you inherited of your parents on the day that you were born?
Wow, that's a big question. I inherited a very big history in terms of my identity, a very big, complex, rich history. Yeah, I feel so. I'm Sri Lankan and Dutch. So yeah, my mum's Sri Lankanness, I guess, and my dad's Dutchness. Yeah, I guess I mean that question brings up so much for me. I find it quite difficult to really articulate myself actually in terms of everything that I would have inherited, because obviously there's my mixed background and there's everything that my parents are and brought kind of culturally and individually and everything. So I'm a bit like, ah.
I mean, if you want, we can, go over them step by step. Were you born in either of those countries, or were you born in a different
No,
country entirely again?
I was born, I'm a third culture kid. So I was born in England. I was born in a place called Guildford, which is in Surrey. It's like home counties, very, very, quiet sort of town area. I ended up growing up in a village outside called Shalford, which was even more rural and more kind of like farmland and stuff.
Sri Lankan mum, Dutch dad. What of those two cultures do you remember from your childhood? What did your parents bring into the home in a different country that you would distinguish as, quintessentially Dutch or Sri Lankan?
Yeah, I think I was very Dutch, probably first. I don't know, maybe Sri Lankan. I mean, the Sri Lankan family, I remember I have a very vivid memory that they used to send us a lot of kind of cultural items, which was really lovely. And that's really imprinted on my brain from like kind of when I was a toddler, I suppose, or just quite young. I remember they sent me this beautiful white Sri Lankan dress with these embroidered purple flowers. And I used to absolutely love that dress and think that I was the queen, like, when I was wearing it. It was this, like, white dress with, like, little straps, and, that my Sri Lankan family also used to send a lot of jewelry because I had my ears pierced when I was very young, as a lot of South Asian babies do. They would send me different earrings because I loved changing my earrings and changing I loved jewelry from a very young age, and I had a lot of South Asian, Sri Lankan bangles that they sent me, so I would really rejoice, like, putting those on, and I had these, like, they'd sent me a lot of, semi-precious jewelry, yeah, semi-precious stone jewelry. So I had, like, I was obsessed with moonstones, from really young, and I refused to take them out. I would wear my moonstone earrings all the time, and, yeah, so things like that, and they'd send us, like, I remember these beautiful, like, shell necklaces that they sent us. So, yeah, so that was really lovely. Like, my Sri Lankan family did send us, items all the time that I really connected with, like, on a soul level. I was obsessed with them. But I didn't go to Sri Lanka until much later, so until much more recently. But we went to Holland all the time when I was little. So I absolutely loved Holland. We would go there and visit my Dutch Oma. She lived in the south of Amsterdam. So we would visit Amsterdam all the time, really regularly. And I have incredible memories as a child. I was obsessed with going to Holland and yeah, just completely obsessed. I'm still now when I go back, and I went very recently to visit my cousin and their family. And I just went straight in and just went and ordered loads of haring and yeah, and I just love the patat and just all the street food I love, and just yeah, the Hamer. I used to be obsessed with going to the Hamer, and I always have to go in and sit down there just to kind of experience. Even though everybody's like, "Why are you so obsessed with the Hamer?" And it's like, well, we used to go there, and just I love it. So yeah, really, really good memories. But I didn't go to Sri Lanka until I was older. So
And yeah, then the second thing that I'm then curious about is language.
yeah.
What language did you speak in the home?
We spoke English basically, like, because my parents they didn't teach us Sri Lankan or Dutch. So, and they had to speak English to each other because they obviously didn't speak each other's languages. So English was obviously the third sort of in between language for everyone. And it's obviously what I grew up with, like, I don't really call myself English, but as a British person. Yeah, so that was communication. I mean, it's something that I've talked about quite a lot in my book, The Mixed and Multiracial Guide to Wellbeing. I've talked about that communication, I think, can be on a kind of a bit of another level in terms of with kind of mixed cultural identities, because when you've got for example, a family like mine who are, Sri Lankan, Dutch, they're not speaking to each other in their mother tongue. So they've got a different language. And then their language is also different to my as a mixed person who's also different to them. I'm then speaking another language. And I do think communication in general was difficult in our family on so many different levels. So, you've just got it on a cultural level there. But if you think about the emotions that come with growing up in different countries and the different ways of being that might not be conveyed necessarily, I think a lot of the issues that I had with my parents actually was that they didn't necessarily understand me culturally, or they don't understand me culturally sometimes. And I don't understand. I realized sort of much later, like, I think sometimes, like, I've judged my mum for certain things where it might just be like a Sri Lankan way of saying it or a Sri Lankan way of doing it. But I've been looking at it with the British lens or the English lens. So that's been quite complicated in terms of emotionally.
Yeah, I can see that, and I can relate to that. And I think it's harder even if you haven't spent time in the culture yourself or with extended family who can explain, you see the dynamics better when you see your mom, in that cultural setting, really.
Yeah, it really helped when I went to Sri Lanka and I saw my mum, like, with her brother and her sister, and I saw her in the context. I started to understand a lot more about how she is, but I didn't necessarily it wasn't explained to me. I didn't understand it. I'd never seen any other people like that. Apart from my mum, I just knew obviously that's my mum. But we didn't have like a big Sri Lankan community in Guildford or anything like that. So yeah, you just kind of it was quite isolated, I suppose, and it's only later when I've seen my mum, yeah, in Sri Lankan environments, like even things like going to kind of this restaurant called Hopper's, Sri Lankan restaurant that we have here in London, which is amazing. Just seeing my mum eating Sri Lankan food in a Sri Lankan context rather than seeing my mum sort of sat at home eating chilies like on her own, just without any explanation. 'Cause she was used to eat chilies until she was, like, in tears and had a really red face, and I was just like, "What are you doing?" Like, we just didn't understand, because we didn't really, get the whole context behind it, but now I'm like, "Oh, okay." She's, like, connecting with herself.
So were you
It's yeah, it was it.
were you curious about it as a kid? Did you ask questions? If it's not something that it sounds like your mother would offer up freely almost, did you were you
Yeah.
inquisitive as to, that part of her and you, I guess?
I mean, I think to a certain extent, but I think also to a certain extent not, and I think that's also because there's so many other reasons why in my family in particular, that wouldn't these conversations wouldn't come up. I think my mum there wasn't a lot of conversation in terms of cultural conversations in our family in general. So we weren't really, and that is also because my family, have quite a lot of trauma in their backgrounds. So it's not something that necessarily I think they wanted to go into.
Mm.
So I think unconsciously, I think unconsciously I didn't really ask that much because there wasn't really permission. So there was a sense of, mum finds it difficult, or because my mum had left when the war was going on in Sri Lanka. So I was very aware of my mum being on the phone or that these letters that would arrive kind of via airmail, that my mum would seem quite emotional around the time when this kind of communication, it was all unspoken, but it was just stuff I observed as a child. But I was very aware that there was a kind of a bit of a difficult connection. I don't think it was conscious. I don't think I was thinking, "Oh, mum's finding this really," but I think I just because of that, there was a silencing, let's say, around quite a lot of cultural stuff in our family. So it's like if it was given to you or if it was expressed, you would obviously take it in, but I don't think I asked too many questions, and I think that might be the reason why.
Mm, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I can relate to that. It's weird how as a child you sense that there's places that you shouldn't really be going, even though you don't even know what these places are or what they're about. Or have you? When did you go to Sri Lanka then?
I went to the Sri Lanka for the first time after my dad passed away in I don't remember exactly when it was, but my dad passed in 2012. So that was when we went on a trip together, to Sri Lanka because before that there my dad had a lot of trauma. My dad was a Holocaust and Auschwitz survivor baby. So he grew up with a lot of trauma and took a lot of the space, I guess I would say, in the home. So we didn't travel to Sri Lanka. We didn't go as a family. We only went to Holland and we didn't go because he was scared of flying. There were so many reasons, like in terms of, why that was. And I think my mum sort of played into quite sort of maybe a bit of a colonial dialogue as well of, going along with your husband. And I think that's how it was at that time as well, of, not really, maybe not really pushing her narrative so much because his narrative was so all encompassing. She would enjoy like her Sri Lankanness and like in her own way and, introduce food and things like that. But it was just the kind of there was so much going on with my dad's mental health. I don't think mum really had the opportunity to, like, really engage with that, and then there was obviously all the issues with what was going on in Sri Lanka as well, and fear. She did go back on her own, a few times, but and I think there was a reluctance with her own family situation as well, to go back. Like, I think there was unconscious stuff that she hadn't necessarily made sense of for herself to but the main part was dad's mental health was really, really a lot.
What what did going to Sri Lanka, what was that experience like for you, coming off the airplane and smells, sounds, sights?
Yeah. I mean, it was total culture shock. It was just I don't know, it's really hard to explain how I felt because I think I just was I mean, I was there with my sister and we were kind of laughing and just sort of, going through, customs and just, taking everything in our stride. It's just a very different experience, like, when you've never been there before. And, obviously I am an a British English person, and it took some getting used to. I mean, I loved it. I definitely say I loved it. It's got like a hustle and bustle that I really remember, and but it's hard to say like how I really felt. I think culture shock was the main thing. Just wow, this is part of where I'm from, and to only really experience that so late was a kind of a weird experience. But, I met my cousins who obviously I knew about and my uncle and aunties, like tons and tons of aunties. I come from a majority female family, so there's not, there's tons of women. And I remember one we went to my uncle's house and they made like loads of lovely food. They were so welcoming. Obviously, the family were absolutely, lovely and so friendly. And yeah, I just remember all these aunties like coming to us and singing. It was just very, very, I guess the word is overwhelming. It was
Yeah.
very overwhelming. You know, you grow up not really feeling like you fit in to where you are, and then you go to another country that is where you're originally, your mum is from, but you don't necessarily fit there either. So it's a weird experience. I still now I'm not, I'm not really sure, in terms of belonging. It's like I think I belong everywhere, I belong to
Mm.
all my countries.
Yeah, yeah, and that was one of my questions as well, actually. How do people see you growing up in school, primary school, secondary school? You know, when you go into the workplace, would people ever question your Britishness? Did they wonder? Was it perhaps your name that would give something away, or was it appearance wise, or did they just accept you as being British? Like how would people receive you?
I don't think I've ever really felt like, I mean, I know I'm British and I accept myself and I think I am British, but I wonder, I don't think I ever really felt, and I guess I have to use the word English in this context, which is really strange that I feel a bit of a reluctance to use it. But I did, obviously I am English and I grew up in England, but I think I haven't, yeah, I didn't feel English, and I don't think people thought I was English. I don't think I've experienced that growing up. It was always being othered and very palpably a feeling of it. Because where I grew up as well was very, like, not very multicultural. At the time, it wasn't. It's certainly more multicultural now, but I think at the time it wasn't. And obviously, my name, is none of it sounds English, and then I don't look English either. So yeah, I struggled with a lot of that stuff, in terms of identity. Growing up when your parents, I write in my book, obviously, there's a lot of, there's a whole chapter on family and identity. And, the importance of parents who are bringing up mixed children, and how important it is to sort of reflect and mirror to us, that we are mixed and we are both of them, and we are also something separate to them. And that's really special and important and something to be celebrated, because otherwise what happens is the child might go to school like me and not know what race they are, or what, that they're mixed or anything like that, or not understand it or not been explained. And then people, take on all kinds of project, they say, they decide for you, basically. They will decide for you how you feel about yourself in terms of your identity. So it became something that I was, like, very quiet about. I didn't know, because I didn't know how to express it. I kind of reduced myself in that sense to just allowing other people to decide for me, because I didn't know, so that was a real struggle. And it wasn't until I got to my teenage years until it became like a thing, because obviously I was becoming like a woman and growing into my looks, and that became a feature of my identity that I could lean on as something different, that was, maybe a positive thing. But actually, I think without the underlying identity development support, I don't necessarily think that's a particularly, even though it's seen as a positive thing, like how mixed people look, and, it's so celebrated and people are so interested in how we look. I don't necessarily think that's, like, helpful to our identity development. And particularly if we learn to rely on that as well, because it doesn't actually develop, like, true confidence, So might be something that people like, but identity has to be about what we understand about ourselves, about our self concept.
So what would you have needed as a child to guide you better in that process?
I think parents that understood that they were bringing a mixed child into the world. I think they knew they were bringing a mixed child into the world, but they didn't really know how to talk about it. Parents in an interracial relationship that can talk about race
Mm.
and that are comfortable with their own. Because I think my parents, the reason this happened is because my parents, you know, didn't were a little bit like, obviously my mum knows she's Sri Lankan and she's brown, but, and she was very aware of racism because it was happening to her, but it wasn't necessarily something that was massively discussed in the family, if at all. Even though my dad was anti-racist, and but I think his Jewish heritage created some complications in terms of him really understanding my mum's experience, I don't think I don't think they spoke about it. I think
Mm,
having conversations between, mixed partnerships
mm.
will help you to create a foundation for your child, because if you have, I mean, we all have issues obviously with racial identity and stuff like that. That's completely normal. But if you're not able or willing to talk about it, that's going to affect your child. And obviously, children come out different colors. I'm very light skinned. My mum's dark skinned. This all plays out, as we know, with colorism and how that affects communities and how unspoken it is. But obviously, with mixed children who come out all different colors, that will all play out in their experience as well. And it will play out between siblings. And it's really important that there's understanding around it. And, parents become aware. That's why I speak about it. I put so much attention on it in my book, because so many mixed children you know, don't experience being seen within their own families.
And yeah, because you're a psychotherapist, am I correct?
Yes.
And again, interesting to me as well, in the sense that I remember at a point in my life where I thought, okay, I think I need to go into therapy, but thinking I would like to speak to somebody who understands that duality, because those were things that I was struggling with in my life, and I would find it difficult to perhaps have a Dutch person sit in front of me and not understand cultural context, or the reality of growing up in a mixed heritage family. Do you think that that actually is important, or is a good psychotherapist for anyone? Or is there, this thing that I am saying, I'm looking for someone who, is similar to me? Is that even a thing, or does that even not come into
Yeah.
question? If you're a good psychotherapist, you're a good.
No, absolutely. Like, it does come into it. It's really important that, therapists are, I mean, I believe that therapists can come from obviously any race, like if they've done the work. You can have a good psychotherapist for sure, and that can be a really, really kind of productive relationship. But it is a really specific experience being mixed, and as you mentioned, the duality of the experience, and what we're dealing with quite a lot with that duality, which is not necessarily, because what the duality is about being racially non-binary, if we put it in those terms. So we are dealing with like two or more different races that are overlapping, that are our entire experience. And that's something that's not considered, like, just in general in psychotherapy, that somebody might be racially non-binary. So even
Right.
though you might get a good psychotherapist, if they don't have the cultural humility to lean into the experience of being racially non-binary, or even have the thought in their mind to consider that, because they're coming from a monoracial perspective, whether they are you know um, white monoracial, brown monoracial, black monoracial, doesn't really matter in terms of that, that monoracial lens will see us as, binary, in that binary perspective. And that's what we're looking out for as mixed people when you're looking for therapists, is that, yes, of course, they can come from any race, but are they able to, see us from that? Are they able to acknowledge that they are a monoracial person, for example, in the first place, and that we aren't,
Mm.
And that's really, really important. So, and I do think the mixed experience in therapy is so underrepresented, in terms of, we haven't really, you know, understood our own. A lot of mixed therapists won't have really got the opportunity to understand their own experience through the psychotherapeutic lens that exists as it is. They might have done some race work, because there's like a lot of really good, race and trauma, information out there, but it won't necessarily apply holistically to a mixed person, because we go through other things as well, because of the racially non-binary lens that we need to look at ourselves through. We need a therapist who can hold that up for us and say, okay, I'm seeing you like this as a racially non-binary person, so that we can see ourselves. because a lot of the time we don't see ourselves very clearly, and therefore we don't see our mental health very clearly, and why our mental health could be, certain aspects could be the way it is because of completely unseen issues that maybe aren't dealt with in therapy,
Mm.
if that makes sense. I know it's quite it's quite a lot to get your head around.
Yeah, that does make total sense to me, actually. The fact that the therapist would have to acknowledge that there might be, yeah, that their experience of being split in half, or having two holes, or however you want to define it. I think, like you say, if they don't recognize that, then that is half of the work in therapy just set aside from the get-go. And I think the thing,
Exactly.
I did
Exactly.
end up finding a lady, interestingly, who she lived in Amsterdam, and I was living in Leeds at the time already, but she lived in Amsterdam and she spoke English, but she'd been in Amsterdam for so long that she also spoke Dutch. And so while she was an Irish lady living in the Netherlands, speaking English, but also Dutch, very interestingly, when we had our introductory call, she said, you know, it might be helpful that we can speak in both languages. And I hadn't really appreciated how beneficial that might be, because language is such a Dutch is the language of my youth, and if we were going to speak about my
Mhm.
youth, I could refer to things in Dutch, which is very different.
Wonderful.
You know? Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I had quite a visceral response to that. It's just something about, yeah, your therapist doing that and recognizing that that would be powerful for you because there's so much in the body and in your psyche that is not just about speaking from your head. Your memories of Holland and growing up there will be in your body. And I love that she did that and she offered that to you. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I was.
No, no, that's fine. Yeah, that is something that whilst I couldn't find a therapist who was Cameroonian Dutch, and knew of this place and knew of that place, and could put my parents in its context, I felt like I did find someone who could put parts of me, at the very least, in some kind of context. How over time have you reconciled your mixed heritage, if you have at all?
Yeah. I think I'm still, constantly a work in progress. But I think my creativity really, really helps for me to understand. And I haven't always fully understood my mixed identity to the extent which I understand it now. But I think throughout my life, I've been very lucky to work in creative fields. First of all, I worked in fashion, which was actually really, really helpful in terms of just working through things like visually, and with the body and like with clothes and really recognizing that, I like to mix things together, which is not a coincidence, I think, seeing as I'm a mixed person. And I was aware to, maybe not to into the depth level that I understand now, but just that I like to mix things together that clashed and colors that clashed. And I liked to use a lot of very rich, kind of bright colors that were like of my mum's South Asian heritage. And I was really interested in different kind of cultural items from different countries, from Holland as well. I definitely think a design aesthetic came from Holland as well. So, more kind of I guess there's a more like a more minimal side to me as well as the very maximal side. So I think I was playing around with a lot of those ideas throughout my career, which was lovely. Yeah, so I think, and then it changed obviously when I became a psychotherapist. I trained as a psychotherapist when my father passed away. I decided to go on this whole other journey of I wanted to discover, I explored a lot of my outer self and I wanted to explore my inner self. And then from that therapy journey, I think I started to connect on a deeper level, like with, eventually when I did my training, we were training during Black Lives Matter. And then obviously all the stuff around race and therapy came up for me. And I started to engage with that and I was working with a lot of Black and brown clients at the time of, when I was doing my training with this wonderful therapy service called Frontline. And, I started to recognize how important like race and culture were in the therapy space. And then through that, eventually came on to do my final project, which was about mixed identity, which I, finally got to. And then I was like, hang on a minute, why have I never spoken about this?
Mm.
How come, we've not really scratched the surface in therapy? Why don't I really know what to say about being mixed? Even though I've kind of advocated for all my, you know, Black and brown clients, and I really, I feel like I really understand, or I can really empathize on, on a level, but I don't really understand how to explain my mixedness. I wouldn't know how to really talk about it on that level. So then I started, doing the research for my book, and yeah, I really went down that rabbit hole, and I was like, okay, we really need support in the mixed community because we don't have it.
And the part of me also wondered because when I started this podcast, I was like, I mean, are people wanting to hear like our stories? And are we not moving into a world where it's so much more normalized to have mixed race families? And so I felt like, I was kind of just doing this for my own therapy rather than actually having a conversation that was necessary in this day and age. But I do think, the feedback that I've had from people. So this is actually a two-pronged question maybe, but one of them is we are growing as a group, I think, in Britain, in America, and the Netherlands, I know. So I think the problems that you just address within therapy alone are just gonna grow. But then on the other hand, when I started this podcast, one of my friends, she's South African, but married a white man, and she just had a baby. And she said, Sas, thank you so much for this podcast because it's going to teach me so much as to how to help my kid, I guess, through this mixed existence. And I hadn't, I guess, in a way, like you say, how much do you think about your mixedness, your own mixedness growing up, right? For you, it came quite late. She sounds like a parent who is super on the ball and really, really, really deeply understands that the kid she's putting in the world needs a little bit of extra attention. So I wonder if the parents of now see that more clearly than the parents from back in the day.
Yeah, I think they probably do. My experience is that, I mean, when I did the original book launch for the live book launch for the book back in March, there was a couple that came with their baby, with a mixed baby. I don't remember specifically where they were from, but they they'd come on, like, a Saturday evening, traveled, like, from God knows where to come to see the book launch. So and they spoke, and they were very, very adamant of how important it was that they really, need to care about their mixed child's identity, to the point that they came with their baby to the launch, which
Mm.
was just such a moving, like, wonderful thing to experience. And I do think there are a lot of mixed families now that are putting that level of care into their mixed children, which is wonderful. I think also that there are lots of people that aren't, because lots of people get into mixed relationships, maybe with unseen internalized racism or racism themselves. It's not uncommon for mixed people, as I'm sure you know, to grow up with racist family members, or, racism in their own experiences of childhood. And we are navigating all of this stuff on our own, and we haven't been allowed to speak about it because nobody really wants to hear us speak about it because it's so complicated. And it's a real challenge to maybe what some people might interpret as what our experiences might be like as mixed people. We get a lot of projections based on how we look, on our skin color, on how our experience might be quite easy, for example, when in reality it's a really, really very tough psychological experience, no, regardless of if you're dealing with, external racism as well. You might be, you might not, depending on your phenotype. But, regardless, it creates the mixed experience and the projections put upon us that we're never really educated to really understand on about how to maybe speak back to those things, or, stand up for ourselves, or, really advocate for ourselves. The psychological experience of not having that support is I will reiterate, it's very, very tough.
Mm.
You know, if you don't have the support, if you have the support, of course, great. It can be a really good experience in many ways. And I'm not saying that I haven't had, many, many good experiences, because I have. But I, as a mental health practitioner, am advocating for my mixed clients, and the level of trauma that I see, based on all of these unspoken experiences, or not even being able to articulate, even in your own psyche, because there's a lack of permission from the monoracial world to even acknowledge to yourself what the reality of your own experience is as a mixed person.
Yeah, I think actually now you say it in that way, that is wildly interesting. And I think it again, it also touches on what we started this conversation with, is that you sometimes inherently know, don't go there. That feels tricky, you know? And if you continuously, you don't go there, you don't go there, you don't go there, it's like a suppression of something that you deep down inside know that there's some kind of key or an unlock there, but you actually don't feel like you have the permission to go and open a door and look inside what is actually happening there. And I think to a large degree as well, you take the experiences of your parents as gospel, even though they say the complete opposite thing, right? At least, that's largely my experience in there as well, where my mother would struggle with my father's family, and she would feel that she was racially, I mean, I don't know what the racialized, I guess that's the word.
Mhm.
Whereas my father, would say, maybe perhaps to an extent that that might be true, but he would put that all under the banner of ignorance, and that was just something that, you just have to deal with. But as a kid, it gets supremely confusing when your mother, is racially like stigmatized, but then you still go to the family and you're just like, I'm confused on so many
Yeah.
levels, but let's keep playing this game because it seems like this is what we do."
Yeah. We have to learn to hold so much like interfamilial racism before we've even stepped out the door to go to go outside. We already understand racism within our own home. Or we maybe don't understand it, but we know it exists on some
Mm.
level, because we have to live with it within our own family systems. And that is something which has been completely missed in terms of speaking about mixed people's experiences, and particularly in psychotherapy, and what that experience is like when you're growing up with, developmental racism from family members. Because monoracial people will go out into the world and experience racism. Yes, they might experience it. I'm not saying it's never going to happen in their own families if there's internalized racism, or adoption, for example. But it's unlikely, compared to mixed people, that you're going to grow up with the level of having to deal with this kind of like disconnect of like, well, these are my family, they love me, but they also are racist. That's a very difficult psychological experience that needs to be unpacked.
Yeah. Yes. That sounds like a whole other 1 hour long discussion.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that you've had a busy morning. You might have another busy afternoon coming up. Tell me a little bit more about the book and then where people can find it.
Yeah. So the book is called The Mixed and Multiracial Guide to Wellbeing: Navigating Family, Identity and Healing. And you can buy it. I think it's quite widely available, all the usual places like Amazon. You can get it from my publisher, Jessica Kingsley publishing, lots and lots of places that I can't remember any of the names. I just wanted to say we are actually doing a online launch for the book that's actually coming up that I'd love to invite you to as well on the 22nd of July with online events. And I will be posting information about that imminently on my social media. So you can find me at Mixed Therapist on social media on Instagram at the moment. That's where I'm kind of hanging out. I'm going to be in a conversation with Dr. Yvonne Guest, who created the Kaleidoscope event, international event for, yeah, you might know about it, for working with mixed and multiracial identity and therapy, which is like a whole thing. And there's loads of therapists. They're doing it yearly. It's a fantastic event. I would really, really recommend that anybody kind of watching this would, sign up to that, because you get loads and loads of workshops and it's really fabulous. But basically, Dr. Yvonne will be interviewing me, and we'll also be joined by some of the contributors to the book, the international contributors, the UK contributors, and also Lydia and Jamila from mixedmentalhealth.com, because they're starting a platform so that they can put you in touch with mixed therapists or therapists that work with mixed mental health, because we currently don't have anything like that. So they've created it.
Amazing. Amazing. I will put links to all of those things in the show notes as well. Super important.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Honestly, really, really appreciate you giving up your time. I know when people listen to this, they will get so much more informed, which is what I'm all about. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Saskia, as well. It's been absolutely lovely.